Okay, welcome to Planet Geography. Today we're tackling the three different types of rainfall. There are convectional rainfall, relief rainfall, and frontal rainfall. These three different types of rainfall appear in all exam specifications, EdXL, AQA, OCR. And we'll get into more detail on all three of them, but before we do, we need to understand what this word condense means, or condenses. This is when water turns from a gas into a liquid. It's the opposite of evaporation. We know evaporation happens when you heat water up. This is when you cool water down. So just note, in all of these diagrams, we have hot air being pushed up, and when it does push up, it cools down, and that gas turns to a liquid. That is condenses, and that condensation forms precipitation. Okay? Right, let's jump into convectional rainfall now then. Okay, so convectional rainfall. This is kind of found on the equator. We have those consistently high temperatures above 30 degrees. So Vietnam, for example, Thailand, but also Brazil. What we have is our sun, high concentration of solar radiation at the equator, which you should know from atmospheric cells and so forth. It gives out a huge amount of energy. Now, at the equator, we have our soil. And in our soil is a large amount of moisture. Okay, this could be groundwater flow, this could be lakes, rivers, forests, etc. Okay, now when we heat up a liquid, I hope you know that when you do, you start to see a process which is the opposite of the opposite of condensation, which is evaporation. Okay. Now, as we spoke of before, warm air rises. Think about your atmospheric cells. It rises. And as it rises, it gets further away from the ground, which is being heated, which is the heat source. So as it travels further away from the heat source, its temperature begins to cool down. So we have this warm air that's full of moisture, and it starts to cool down. And then we can expect to see condensation, okay? And with that, we get our huge clouds. That liquid is turning from a gas to form water droplets. These are the bases of which clouds are. Okay, when it builds up enough, that condensation leads to large amounts of rainfall in the form of precipitation. Okay, and that is our first type of rainfall. Okay, evaporation, condensation, found at the equator. Those are kind of the words that you really need. Right, now let's jump on to our next form of rainfall. Okay, so let's talk about our second type of rainfall. This is relief rainfall. Now, relief just means the shape of the land. So, this is our mountain range. We're going to use a UK example, so we're just going to say the Pennines. Okay, the Pennines runs down the spine of England. So this here is going to be the west coast. Okay, so we're just going to set this up. This is the Irish Sea. And over here is going to be the east coast of England. All right, now on the west coast, we have way higher levels of rainfall. Okay, so think of your cities like Manchester, famously rainy, east coast, Newcastle and Sunderland. All right, much less rainy. We'll talk about why that is in a second. So with relief rainfall, the energy for this process comes from the sun. The sun sends down solar radiation, and that solar radiation heats up our oceans, just like with hurricanes, and it causes that process when you heat water, which I'm sure we all know, it causes evaporation. Now, evaporation means that the air, we have this warm, moist air moving inland. Okay? Now, when it gets to our mountain range, it is pushed upwards. You can see here it's pushed upwards. So whenever we have air being pushed upwards, we're going to see its temperature drop, and we're going to see condensation taking place. Okay? The idea of turning from a gas to a liquid is going to take place. Condensation. And it's going to dump all of that moisture onto the western side of the mountain. As a result, there's going to be no moisture left, and so we're going to have a rain shadow, I'm just going to put RS down, appearing on the eastern side. And that is why the west coast of England is far more rainy and receives far higher levels of precipitation than our east coast. Okay, so just to quickly run through that, as the air is blown in, it is forced up by the relief, by the mountain range, causing it to cool down, causing condensation, and then as a result, creating a rain shadow on the eastern side of the mountain range. Okay, hope that makes sense. We'll just move on to the last type of rainfall, which is frontal rainfall. Okay, let's talk about the final type of rainfall, which is frontal rainfall. So let's just check our academic language and understand, do we know what a front is? Okay, so in history, you have the western front or a front line. It's essentially a boundary between two, or where two things meet. It could be two armies. In this case, it's going to be a warm front, so an area of warm air, and a cold front, okay? This happens often at mid-latitude locations as warm air comes up from the equator and cool air comes down from the poles. And an example of this would be the UK, and explains partly why the UK is a rainy island, okay? Now, when these two fronts meet, you should really know what's going to happen at this point, okay? If you think about your atmospheric cells, the warm air wants to rise, and the cold air, it wants to sink. Now, when the warm air rises, its altitude increases, its temperature decreases. And all that moisture carrying, we know what's going to happen. I'm sure you already worked it out. We're going to get condensation. Yep, going from a gas to a liquid. And that condensation builds up in the clouds until we get precipitation. Okay? I really like this one. I think it's the simplest to talk about. All you need to know is what a front is, warm air, cold air, condensation leads to precipitation, and you're done. Okay? Guys, we're now going to jump into an exam question as always, so stay tuned for that. If not, like and subscribe for future videos. I'll be making more as we move towards the exam period. Okay, so let's look at a question from the Edexcel B paper, the unit on UK climates. So let's bug the question. Box the command word, explain, underline one difference, uplands, lowlands, okay, and UK maybe. Yep, so we understand that this is about climates, uplands and lowlands. So what is different about them? So this question is not actually asking you directly about rainfall, but it's expecting you to know the three different types of rainfall and how actually one of the types links to uplands and lowlands, which essentially is relief. So relief rainfall is the answer we're going to look to go for. Okay, so this is our mark scheme. Pause it, have a read of it, and see if that makes sense to you. This first point here is the one that we're really going to go and look at. So uplands are wetter than lowlands. That's your point. Get that mark. So this is points-based marking. It's 2 marks. Due to relief rainfall and or mountains forcing air to rise, thus cool and create clouds. Yep. So again, relief rainfall is the answer to go for. Okay. So structure is going to be one blank is because. It could be one difference or one reason. I think I've gone for reason, but actually I think maybe difference would be better. So one reason is upland areas receive higher levels of rainfall. Okay, fine, that's our point. So it's all about more rainfall in upland areas because as warm, moist air rises, it condenses, leading to precipitation. So again, the examiner will be skim reading your work. You'll see here uplands and rainfall will get you the mark, and then your second development here, moist air condenses precipitation. So really condenses and precipitation will be enough to get you that second mark. So again, as always, combining your structure, which is your connectors, with your key language, that tier 2 and tier 3 geography words, and you're going to get the full marks, okay? So I hope that helps, and like and subscribe for future videos as we'll be making more and more as we get closer to the exam season.